Hey there! Welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. This happened just last night, which somehow makes it feel worse, like my nerves haven't even had time to calm down yet. I live alone, and I'm a petite woman, which is something I'm very aware of, especially at night. I'm not paranoid, but I'm realistic. When you live by yourself, you learn to notice sounds, patterns, and anything that feels even slightly off. I had gone to bed like normal. Nothing unusual about the evening at all. Locked the doors, checked the windows, turned the lights off, and crawled into bed, expecting a quiet night. I fell asleep without any trouble, completely unaware that my body was about to be launched into full survival mode a few hours later. I woke up suddenly, the way you do when a sound slices straight through your sleep instead of slowly pulling you out of it. It wasn't a bang or a crash, it was a voice. A male voice. It was outside my bedroom window. At first, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly. When you're half asleep and you hear something that doesn't belong, your brain tries to convince you it's a dream, that it's the TV or your phone or something from outside that doesn't involve you. But this voice was too clear, too close, too real. He said very clearly, "I don't think she's dumb enough to leave the door unlocked." Those words hit me like ice water. It wasn't just the fact that there was a man outside my window, it was what he said. He wasn't talking to himself, he was talking to someone else. That meant there were at least two people. And he was talking about me, about my door, about whether it was locked. My heart started pounding so hard, it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I sat up in bed, completely silent, listening with everything I had. My room was dark. The house was dark. Every shadow suddenly looked heavier. Before I could even fully process what I'd heard, I heard something else. My front door handle. Someone was turning it. Not gently. Not like someone testing it once and moving on. It was aggressive, repeated, like whoever it was expected the door to open and was annoyed that it didn't. I knew immediately that the door was locked. I always lock it. But knowing that didn't make the sound any less terrifying. Hearing someone try to enter your home is a completely different level of fear. It's intimate. It's invasive. It's the sound of safety being challenged. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could. My whole body was shaking, but my movements felt strangely focused. Like muscle memory kicked in before panic could fully take over. I grabbed the biggest knife I own from the kitchen. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel tough. I felt like an animal backed into a corner, holding the only thing that might give me a chance. I stood there in the dark, gripping that knife so tightly my hand hurt. Every nerve in my body was screaming. My ears were ringing. I was trying to listen and breathe at the same time, which felt impossible. Then I heard it. A key. Someone put a key into my lock. That was the moment my fear spiked into something sharp and electric. Turning a handle is one thing. A key is another. A key means intention. It means someone thinks they should be able to get inside. I remember thinking very clearly that if that door opened, I was going to have to do something I never wanted to do. But I stood there, frozen but ready, waiting for the sound of the lock turning, waiting for the door to open, waiting for footsteps. Seconds stretched out forever, and then, suddenly, everything went quiet. No voices, no door handle, no key. just silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong after chaos. The kind that makes your ears strain because you're convinced something is still happening and you're just not hearing it. I didn't move for a long time. I stayed exactly where I was, knife in hand, heart pounding, listening for any sign that they were still there. I didn't want to look out the window. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to do anything that might let someone know where I was. Eventually, when nothing else happened, I locked myself in my bedroom and sat on the bed shaking. My hands were trembling so badly I had to put the knife down because I was afraid I'd drop it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every sound outside made my stomach flip. A car passing, someone walking, a door somewhere else in the building. My mind went over every possible explanation, and none of them were comforting. I kept replaying the voice in my head, the words he said, the certainty in his tone. In the morning, once it was light out, and my heart rate had finally slowed to something close to normal, I decided I needed to warn my neighbor. I didn't want to panic her, but I felt like I had to say something. What if there really were sketchy guys wandering around trying doors? What if it happened to someone else? So I texted her and told her what had happened. I explained that I'd heard men outside my window, that someone tried my door, and that it scared the hell out of me. I told her to be careful and lock everything because something didn't feel right. Her reply came back almost immediately. It was full of apologies. She explained that it was her drunk boyfriend. Apparently, he had gotten the wrong house. He thought mine was hers. He was trying to get in, talking out loud, and using a key that obviously didn't work because it wasn't the right door. Reading that message was like having all the tension drain out of my body at once. Relief hit first. Huge, overwhelming relief. The kind that makes you feel lightheaded. I wasn't being targeted. No one was casing my house. No one was planning to break in. But then came the aftershock. Because even though it was a mistake, it was still terrifying. It didn't change how real it felt in the moment. It didn't erase the sound of that voice outside my window or the feeling of standing in the dark, holding a knife, preparing for the worst. I couldn't even be mad at her, honestly. Mostly because my own friends have done the same thing to her, twice. Drunk, confused, trying the wrong door, convinced they were at the right place. We all laughed about it afterward, but standing on the other side of that door made me realize just how not funny it is when you don't know what's happening. We joked that we should all probably drink less, and yeah, that's true. But underneath the humor, there was a shared understanding that things like this can go very wrong very fast. What stuck with me the most wasn't the embarrassment or the awkwardness of the explanation. It was how quickly my sense of safety disappeared. One moment I was asleep in my bed, and the next I was preparing to defend my home. That switch flipped instantly. Even now, thinking back on it, my chest tightens a little. I keep replaying it, imagining how differently it could have gone. What if he'd forced the door? What if I hadn't locked it? What if I'd panicked and made noise at the wrong time? It was just a mistake. A stupid, drunk mistake. But it reminded me how thin the line is between normal life and absolute terror when you live alone. How a single sound can turn your home into something that feels dangerous instead of safe. I know I'll double-check my locks even more now. I know every noise at night will make me pause a little longer. And I know that no matter how harmless the explanation turned out to be, that moment of fear is something I won't forget anytime soon. Because when you're standing in the dark with the biggest knife you own, waiting for a door to open, it doesn't matter how the story ends. In that moment, it feels very, very real. I was 10 years old, and it was Halloween night, the kind of night that usually feels exciting and harmless when you're a kid. Costumes were everywhere that day, candy bowls were full, and the whole neighborhood had that familiar mix of laughter, cold air, and distant doorbells. By the time this happened, the trick-or-treating was basically over. The house was quiet in that way it gets late in the evening when everything feels settled and still. My baby brother was asleep upstairs. He was really young, still at that stage where every sound could wake him, and once he cried, there was no stopping it. My mom had stepped out to drop my grandmother off at her house, which wasn't very far away. She told me she'd be back soon. This wasn't unusual at all. I'd been left home alone for short periods before, and I was old enough to know the basic rules. Don't open the door, don't touch the stove, don't do anything stupid. Just sit tight. I was in the living room, sitting on the couch, watching TV quietly. I kept the volume low because of my brother sleeping upstairs. The living room was big, with massive floor-to-ceiling windows that went up 2 stories high. They were one of those features adults love and kids don't think about much. During the day, they made the room bright and open. At night, they turned the whole wall into a black mirror reflecting the inside of the house. I remember feeling calm. Bored maybe, but calm. Just a kid flipping through channels, half paying attention, half waiting for my mom to come back so the night could officially be over. There was nothing in my mind that even hinted something bad was about to happen. Then, without any warning at all, everything exploded. There's no better word for it. It wasn't a normal crash, not like when someone drops something heavy. It was loud, violent, and sudden. A boom followed immediately by a smash so intense it felt like the house itself had been hit by something massive. The sound was so loud it felt physical, like it punched the air out of my chest. The huge windows in the living room shattered all at once. Glass came crashing down from above, raining into the room in a terrifying cascade. It wasn't just a crack or a break. The entire wall of glass gave way. Pieces shattered, bounced, and skidded across the floor. The noise echoed through the house, and for a split second, everything felt unreal, like my brain couldn't catch up to what my eyes and ears were telling me. I froze. My first thought wasn't logical. It wasn't someone threw something or there's been an accident. My first thought was pure fear. Something horrible just happened, and I was alone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I remember my whole body shaking, like my muscles had decided on their own to panic before my mind even could. I wanted to scream, but at the same time I didn't. My baby brother was upstairs, and some part of me was terrified of waking him up, because crying would make everything worse somehow. This was 1999. There were no cell phones, no quick way to call for help, no texting my mum. The house phone was there, but it felt so far away, and I didn't even know what I would say. I screamed anyway, but I screamed into the garage. I ran as fast as I could, my feet slipping slightly on the floor, my breath coming out in sharp, panicked gasps. I didn't even think, I just moved. I ran into the garage and screamed, loud and raw, like I was trying to push the fear out of my body. I didn't want the sound to travel up the stairs. I didn't want to wake my brother. I didn't want to make things worse. Then I ran back into the living room and dropped down behind the couch. I crouched there, pressed into the carpet, my back against the furniture, my hands clamped over my mouth. My whole body was tense, every sense stretched to its limit. I was listening for footsteps, voices, anything. My mind was racing, trying to understand what could have caused something like that. Someone could have thrown something. Someone could be outside. Someone could be coming in. The windows were gone. The barrier between inside and outside was gone. And I remember staring at the space where the glass had been, looking at the dark night beyond it. Cold air was coming in. The house didn't feel safe anymore. It felt exposed, like the walls had failed at their one job. I stayed there, hiding behind the couch, waiting for my mom to come back. Every second felt like a minute. Every sound made me flinch. The house felt too quiet after that explosion, like it was holding its breath. Meanwhile, my mom was driving home, completely unaware of what had just happened. As she turned onto our driveway, she noticed something strange. The headlights caught the shine of metal on the ground. Nails. Someone had laid nails across the end of our driveway. If she hadn't noticed in time, she could have driven right over them. The nails were placed deliberately, not dropped by accident. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. She stopped, got out of the car, and realized what had been done. Whoever had done this wasn't just messing around. They were trying to cause damage. Maybe they wanted to trap someone. Maybe they wanted to make sure no one could leave easily. She rushed into the house. When she saw the living room, she understood immediately. The massive windows were destroyed. Glass was everywhere. The cold air poured in, and the space felt violated. She found me behind the couch, shaking, terrified, trying so hard to be quiet and brave at the same time. The police were called. When the officer arrived and examined the scene, even he seemed unsettled. This wasn't a small act of vandalism. The objects that had been thrown through the windows weren't rocks or bricks. They were huge slabs of marble, heavy, solid, and dangerous. The officer said they must have used something like a homemade trebuchet or some kind of launching device to get enough force and height to throw those slabs through a 2-story window. The amount of planning and effort involved made it even worse. This wasn't spontaneous. Someone had thought about this. The officer said it plainly. Someone could have been killed if I'd been standing closer to the windows, if my brother had been in the living room, if my mom had been home at the wrong moment. Those slabs could have done far more than break glass. The people who did it were never caught. That's something that stuck with me the most. There was no clear ending, no sense of justice. Just the knowledge that somewhere out there, people capable of doing something that reckless and violent existed, and they walked away from it. For a long time after that night, I didn't feel safe in my own house. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow outside the windows made my stomach twist. Halloween never felt the same again. What used to be a fun, silly night became something darker in my memory. Even now, years later, I can still remember the sound. That sudden, impossible crash. The feeling of being small and alone in a space that was supposed to protect me. The way fear can hit so fast and so hard that it doesn't even give you time to think. It wasn't supernatural. There were no ghosts, no monsters, no unexplained forces. Just people making a cruel decision and a child learning very suddenly that the world isn't always safe, even inside your own home. And that lesson never really leaves you. My parents owned a small business that sat on the same property as our house, but the two buildings were completely separate. Anyone could tell which one was the shop and which one was our home. The business building faced the road and had signs, parking space, and a front door meant for customers. The house was set farther back, clearly private, with a fence, a gate, and a path that led only to where we lived. There was no confusion between the two, at least not for anyone who was paying attention. When this happened, I was 13 years old. It was a normal day, nothing unusual about it at all. My parents were out running errands related to the business, and I was home alone. That wasn't rare for me. I was used to being by myself for a few hours at a time, and I generally felt safe in my own house. I was old enough to handle small responsibilities, and my parents trusted me. I had been down in the basement doing laundry. The basement was finished, but still had that cool, quiet feeling that basements usually have. I remember carrying a basket full of clean clothes up the stairs, already thinking about folding them in the dining room. The dining room was one of the farthest rooms from the front of the house. To get there from outside, you had to come through the entryway, pass through the living room, walk down the hallway, and then turn into the dining area. It wasn't somewhere you'd accidentally wander into. As I stepped off the basement stairs and walked into the dining room, my brain didn't immediately register what I was seeing. For just a second, everything felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Then it clicked. There was a man standing in my dining room. He wasn't looking at me. He was just standing there, looking around like he was trying to get his bearings, like he had every right to be there, like this was a place he belonged. My heart slammed into my chest. I felt a rush of fear so sharp and sudden that it almost made me dizzy. I was a kid, home alone, and there was a grown man inside my house, not at the door, not knocking, not calling out for someone. Inside. Before I even had time to think, I started yelling. I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing. I asked him what he wanted and why he was in my house. I told him to get out immediately. I didn't hold back at all. Every ounce of fear I felt turned straight into anger, and it came out of my mouth loud and fast. I was swearing, shouting, and honestly sounding half feral. What shocked me even more was that he didn't seem surprised. He didn't apologize. He didn't jump back or say he had made a mistake. He didn't even look embarrassed. He just stood there and calmly told me that he was a customer and that he was there to pick up an order. That made something snap in me. I yelled at him that the shop was closed hours ago. I screamed that he was in the wrong building, that this was my house, not the business. I told him to get the hell out before something bad happened. I didn't physically touch him, but I didn't need to. I was loud enough, aggressive enough, and scared enough that it was clear I was not backing down. Looking back, it still terrifies me that he had walked through the entire lower level of the house without once stopping to question where he was. He hadn't called out. He hadn't asked if anyone was home. He hadn't realized that maybe walking into a private residence was not okay. He had just kept walking until he reached the dining room, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eventually, he backed off. He turned around and left quickly, almost running. I followed at a distance, still yelling, until I saw him get into his car and drive away. Only after he was gone did my hands start shaking. I locked every door in the house. When my parents came home later, I told them everything. I was still rattled, still full of adrenaline, still replaying the moment over and over in my head. They were furious, especially my dad. He couldn't believe that someone had walked into our house and then acted like he was the victim when confronted. The next day made the whole thing even worse. That same man actually called the business and complained. He told my father that I had been rude, that I had used awful language, and that I had an attitude problem. He seriously expected sympathy after walking into a private home and frightening a child. My dad didn't let him finish. He cut him off and told him flat out that he was lucky I hadn't grabbed a knife. He said the man was banned from the property permanently and that his order would not be picked up in person. If he still wanted it, it would be shipped after payment was received. End of discussion. For once there was no debate, no questioning whether I had overreacted, no, maybe he didn't mean any harm. My dad taking my side so completely erased any doubt I had. I knew then that my fear and my reaction had been justified. Still, the damage was done. For months after that, I was paranoid. Every sound made my heart race. If I was home alone, I double-checked locks constantly. I hated being in quiet rooms because the silence reminded me of how easily someone had slipped into my life without warning. I replayed the scene in my head again and again, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't come upstairs when I did. What if I had stayed in the basement longer? What if he had gone upstairs? What if I had frozen instead of yelling? It took a long time for that sense of safety to come back. Even now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. It's one of those moments that changes how you see the world. You realize how thin the line is between normal and terrifying, and how fast things can go wrong without any dramatic build-up. That man probably thought he was inconvenienced. I learned at 13 years old, that you can be completely right to trust your instincts, raise your voice, and protect yourself without apology. And honestly, I still stand by it. At the time this was happening, my life felt pretty normal. Nothing dramatic, nothing stressful enough that I would have expected anything strange to start happening. I was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, the kind of place that feels quiet and safe once you get used to it. I had my routine, my work schedule, my habits. It was comfortable in a boring, predictable way, which is why what started happening felt so unsettling. One thing about the apartment was the storage space. For a one-bedroom place, it had a surprisingly large storage closet. It wasn't a little hallway cupboard or a narrow linen closet. It was big enough to hold boxes, furniture, and all kinds of random items. That closet became important when one of my close friends got a posting overseas. He was going to be gone for 2 years, and he didn't want to get rid of his things or pay for a storage unit. I offered to let him store his stuff in my closet. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. I didn't really use the closet for anything important. He moved in boxes, bags, and a few bulky items until the space was packed almost to the ceiling. Once everything was inside, the door stayed shut. I had no reason to open it. None of my belongings were in there, and I honestly forgot about it most of the time. That's why the first incident caught my attention immediately. I woke up one morning and noticed the closet door was open. Not wide open, but clearly not shut either. Just enough to be noticeable the second I walked past it. It took me a moment to register what I was seeing. I remember stopping and staring at it, trying to figure out if I had left it like that. I knew I hadn't. I hadn't opened that closet since the day my friend packed his stuff inside. There was no reason for me to. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself maybe I had absent-mindedly checked something and forgotten. That happens sometimes. People forget small things all the time. I closed the door and went on with my day. A couple of days later, it happened again. I woke up, walked into the living area, and the closet door was open. This time, I felt a little jolt of unease. Not panic yet, but that subtle discomfort that tells you something doesn't quite add up. I stood there longer this time, replaying my memory of the night before. I was sure I hadn't gone near that door. I shut it again, a bit more firmly, and went to work. That's when I started paying attention. After it happened the third time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every few days, I would wake up or come home to find the closet door open again. It was always the same door, always the same amount. Never slammed wide open, never barely cracked. Just open enough to feel deliberate. My first thought was the door itself. I checked the doorknob, thinking maybe it was loose or faulty. Maybe the latch wasn't catching properly. I tested it over and over, opened it, closed it, pushed it, gently pulled it. Everything worked fine. The latch held. The door stayed shut when I closed it. Then I checked inside. I carefully moved a few boxes, thinking maybe something had shifted. Maybe something heavy had leaned against the door from the inside and pushed it open over time. But nothing looked out of place. Everything was stacked the same way it had been since my friend left. There was no pressure against the door. Nothing touching it at all. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made things worse, because if the door wasn't broken and nothing inside was pushing it open, then something else had to be happening, and that something didn't have an obvious explanation. Around the same time, I started noticing other things. Small things at first. Easy to dismiss if you didn't think too hard about them. A cupboard door in the kitchen would be open when I was sure I had closed it. At first, I told myself I probably forgot. Everyone forgets to close cupboards sometimes. Then it happened again and again. Then I noticed items not where I remembered leaving them. Salt and pepper shakers sitting on the counter when I knew I had left them on the stove. Dishes appearing in the sink when I was fairly sure I hadn't used them, not piles of dishes. Just one or two, enough to make me pause and think. At first I blamed myself. I assumed I was being forgetful, maybe tired, maybe distracted. Life can get busy and sometimes your brain just fills in gaps without you realizing it. But the more it happened, the harder it was to explain everything away. The closet door, the cupboards, the moved objects. They started to form a pattern. That's when fear started creeping in. Not sudden panic, but a slow, uncomfortable realization that something might be wrong. I started thinking about possibilities I didn't like. Someone else having a key. Someone entering the apartment while I was asleep or at work. The idea of someone being in my home without my knowledge made my skin crawl. I checked my locks constantly. Before leaving for work, I double-checked the door. When I came home, I checked again. I made sure windows were locked. I paid attention to sounds at night. Every little noise made me tense. I remember lying in bed sometimes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the apartment settle. Every creak or shift made my heart beat faster. I replayed the day in my head, trying to remember if I had done something that could explain what I was seeing. But the explanations kept falling apart. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up and walked into the kitchen, and the sight stopped me cold. Sugar was everywhere, not just spilled, poured. It was all over the counter, trailing down the side of the stove, scattered across the kitchen floor. It looked deliberate, like someone had taken the container and dumped it without caring where it landed. My heart started pounding instantly. This wasn't something you forget doing. I stood there, staring at the mess, my thoughts racing. Someone had been in my apartment. That was the only thing that made sense. Someone had come in and done this. And for what reason? Just to mess with me? To see if I'd notice? Fear surged through me so hard, my hands started shaking. Then something strange happened. As I stared at the sugar, a memory surfaced. Not a clear memory, but a hazy one, like the tail end of a dream. I remembered standing in the kitchen, half asleep, pouring sugar into a mug of coffee. I remembered feeling annoyed that the lid wouldn't go on properly. It didn't feel real exactly, more like remembering something that hadn't quite happened. That's when I looked down. There was sugar on the floor leading away from the counter. And when I went back to the bedroom, there was sugar in my bed, tiny grains scattered across the sheets. That's when it hit me. Not all at once, but slowly, like pieces snapping into place. I wasn't dealing with an intruder. I was dealing with myself. I had sleepwalked. Suddenly, everything made sense. The closet door opening, the cupboards left ajar, the dishes in the sink. The items moved slightly, but not dramatically. They weren't signs of someone unfamiliar. They were signs of someone who knew the apartment, someone who wasn't trying to hide, someone who wasn't fully aware of what they were doing. I had a history of sleepwalking as a child. I remembered it clearly once I thought about it. My parents telling stories about finding me wandering the house at night, me waking up in strange places. At some point it had stopped, or at least I thought it had. I assumed I had outgrown it, like most kids do. Apparently, I hadn't. The realization was both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because the idea of walking around my apartment completely unaware scared me. I could have hurt myself. I could have done something dangerous without realizing it. Turned on the stove, left the door unlocked, walked outside. But it was also relieving. No one was breaking into my apartment. No one was watching me. No one was sneaking around while I slept. The threat I had imagined didn't exist. After that morning, I started paying closer attention to my sleep patterns. I noticed that the strange things tended to happen when I was stressed or overtired. Nights when I didn't sleep well. Times when my routine was off. I took steps to make my apartment safer. I made sure doors were locked in a way that would wake me if I opened them. I stopped leaving certain items easily accessible at night. I talked to a doctor about it. Once I understood what was happening, the fear lost its grip, but I never forgot how real it felt before I knew the truth. The feeling that someone was inside my home, the paranoia, the constant second-guessing of my own memory. It was a reminder of how easily the mind can turn against itself when it doesn't have answers. Even now, years later, I still sleepwalk occasionally. Not often, but enough to know it never fully went away. I've learned to live with it, to manage it, and to respect it. But I'll never forget that period of time when I thought my apartment was being quietly invaded, when every open door felt like a warning, and when the scariest thing turned out not to be a stranger at all, but my own unconscious mind moving through the dark without me. When I was in college at Georgia Tech, I lived in a building called the GLC. It sat on the far north side of campus, away from most of the academic buildings and student traffic. Because of its location, it wasn't a very popular place to live. Not many people wanted to stay there, and that worked perfectly for me. I liked quiet. I liked space. I liked knowing that when I shut my door at night, the world around me would stay calm and predictable. Because demand was low, I was also able to rebook the same room again and again, which gave me a sense of familiarity and comfort that I really valued during college. When I say the GLC was quiet, I mean it in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived somewhere truly still. We rarely heard our neighbors. Sometimes it even felt like we didn't have any. The only time you really knew someone else existed in the building was when the heavy outer doors slammed shut. Those doors were thick and loud, and the sound echoed down the hallways in a way that reminded you the building wasn't abandoned. Other than that, it was silence, a deep, constant silence that almost felt padded. This experience happened during Thanksgiving break. I almost always stayed on campus during holidays. Most students went home, but I liked the peace. It gave me time to catch up on work, relax, and exist without the constant noise and movement of campus life. That year, my 3 roommates had all left for the break. They packed up and headed home, leaving me alone in the apartment. The already quiet GLC became even quieter, to the point where it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. At first, it was relaxing, the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts stretch out. No voices through the walls, no doors opening or closing, no footsteps in the hallway. Just me, the low hum of the building systems, and the occasional distant sound of traffic far outside. I decided to clean my room, something I rarely felt motivated to do when everyone else was around. I wanted to reset the space, make it feel fresh. While cleaning, I pulled out a bottle of Febreze. That detail matters. One of my roommates absolutely hated the smell of Febreze. It wasn't just a mild dislike. He would complain even if I sprayed it in my own room because the air conditioning circulated air throughout the apartment. If he caught even a hint of it, he'd comment on it. Since he was gone for the break, I figured this was my chance. I sprayed it generously, finally getting rid of that stale college apartment smell that builds up over time. Almost immediately after I sprayed it, I heard something that made my stomach drop. One of my roommate's doors flew open. Not slowly, not casually. It sounded violent, like someone had yanked it open in anger. A second later, the door slammed shut just as hard. Then I heard heavy footsteps stomping into the living room. The footsteps weren't normal walking sounds. They were loud, deliberate, and aggressive, like someone was making sure their presence was known. My first thought was that I had really messed up. I assumed one of my roommates had come back early and that I had unknowingly sprayed the one thing he hated the most. What struck me as strange, though, was how fast and intense the reaction was. There was no pause, no hesitation, and the sound came immediately after I sprayed, as if whoever it was had been waiting to explode the second they smelled it. Still, I felt bad. I didn't want to start a fight. I stepped out of my room and walked into the living room, already preparing my apology. I remember starting to say something like, "Sorry, man, I didn't know you were here," fully expecting to see my roommate standing there, annoyed and ready to complain. But the moment I entered the living room, everything stopped. The footsteps were gone. The air felt empty. No one was there. I stood there for a second, confused. I listened carefully, expecting to hear movement, breathing, anything. There was nothing. The apartment was completely silent again, like it had been moments earlier. The silence felt heavier now, more noticeable. I told myself maybe whoever it was had gone back into their room quickly. That explanation made sense at first, so I walked over and knocked on my roommate's doors. No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I checked the doors more closely and realized they were exactly how they had been left when my roommates departed. Unease started creeping in. I pulled out my phone and texted my roommates, asking if anyone had come back early or stopped by. They all replied that they were still away and wouldn't be back until after the break. There was no confusion, no joking. They were very clearly not there. That's when it fully hit me. I was alone. I stood in the living room, trying to rationalize what had just happened. I replayed the sounds in my head, the door opening, the door slamming, the heavy footsteps, and they were so clear, so distinct, that it felt impossible they weren't real. This wasn't a faint noise or something that could be easily misheard. It sounded like a person reacting with anger, moving with purpose. I checked the apartment thoroughly. I walked through every room, every corner, every closet. I checked the front door to make sure it was locked. It was. I looked for any sign that someone else could have been there. There was nothing. No misplaced items, no open doors, no evidence of another person's presence. After that, the apartment felt different. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. Every small sound made me pause. The hum of the air system seemed louder. The building creaks, which I had never paid attention to before, suddenly stood out. I tried to tell myself it was stress, or that my brain had filled in gaps or exaggerated normal noises, but deep down, that explanation didn't sit right. What disturbed me the most was how specific the sounds were. They matched my roommate's behavior perfectly. The timing, the anger, the pacing of the footsteps, it was exactly how he would have reacted if he were there and upset. That detail stuck with me. It wasn't just random noise. It felt targeted, almost responsive. I never heard footsteps like that again, not during that break, not afterward. In fact, I don't recall ever hearing footsteps that loud in the apartment at all, before or after that incident. The GLC went back to being quiet in its usual way, like nothing had happened. To this day, I don't have an explanation. Maybe it was some strange acoustic effect, maybe pressure changes, building noises, or my exhausted brain misfiring in the silence. But none of those explanations fully explained the door sounds, the footsteps, or how immediate and aggressive it all felt. It's one of those moments that sits in the back of my mind, unresolved. Nothing else ever happened there. No repeating events, no follow-up experiences. Just that one moment, sharp and clear, standing out against years of normal college life. It wasn't dramatic in a movie-like way. It didn't escalate. It just happened and then disappeared, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that sometimes silence can hold more than it should. Even now, when I think about it, I can still hear the sound of that door slamming and those footsteps moving through the living room. And the strangest part isn't fear, it's confusion, the kind that doesn't fade with time, because there was never an answer to replace it. At the time, It felt like the perfect setup. One of those moments where everything is exactly how you want it. I was alone, the lights were off, and the room was completely dark except for the glow coming from the projector. I had a full home theater setup, a huge 100-inch projector screen stretched across the wall, surround sound speakers placed just right, and a comfortable spot to sit where I could lose myself in whatever I was doing. It felt immersive in a way that normal gaming never really does. I was playing Call of Duty, fully locked in. I had my headset on, game audio blasting directly into my ears, voices clear, gunfire sharp and directional. Because I was using the headset, I had turned the surround sound receiver all the way down, not muted halfway, not low, completely off. I didn't want any echo or interference. Just clean game audio straight through the headset, so it was just me, the massive screen, and darkness. Outside, a thunderstorm had been rolling through. Not a light drizzle, but a real storm. Heavy rain hitting the windows, wind pushing against the house, and thunder rumbling low and distant. I noticed it, but I didn't think much of it. Storms happen. I was focused on the game, reacting on instinct, running matches back to back without really thinking. The room felt sealed off from the outside world. Thick darkness, no lamps, no phone light, just the projector lighting up the wall and reflecting softly around the room. It was easy to forget where I was physically because my brain was fully inside the game. Then everything stopped. The screen went black instantly, not fading, not glitching, just gone. The headset cut out at the same time. No sound, no light, total darkness. For half a second, my brain didn't understand what had happened. It felt like reality itself had shut off. One moment I was mid-match, and the next it was like someone had flipped a switch on the world. That's when I felt it, that cold rush through my chest, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your skin go tight all at once. I went completely still. My hands were still holding the controller, frozen in place. My eyes were wide open, but there was nothing to see. The power had gone out. Normally, that wouldn't be a big deal. Power outages happen, especially during storms. I knew that logically, but logic doesn't always arrive on time, especially not when you're alone, in the dark, already overstimulated from a fast-paced game. Before I could even fully register the outage, the power came back, and that's when everything went wrong. When the power reset, the surround sound receiver reset too. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that when it rebooted, it would default to being on. I didn't know that it would come back at full volume, and I definitely didn't know that it would output raw white noise instead of silence. All I knew was this: the room exploded with sound, not music, not voices, just pure white noise, loud, violent, everywhere at once, every speaker firing at full blast in a pitch-black room, front, back, sides, subwoofer shaking the floor. It wasn't directional, it wasn't something I could make sense of. It was like the air itself was screaming, full blast. My brain short-circuited. I genuinely thought I had been struck by lightning. That was the only explanation my mind could come up with in that instant. The timing was perfect in the worst possible way. Thunderstorm outside, power outage, sudden explosion of sound so loud it felt physical. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe properly. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I couldn't process what I was hearing. There was no build-up, no warning, just silence and then instant chaos. My ears rang immediately. The sound was so overwhelming that I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It felt like it was inside my head rather than around me, like my brain itself had started producing noise. I stood up so fast I nearly fell over. I remember this strange disconnect, like my body was moving but my thoughts were stuck somewhere behind. My hands were shaking. My legs felt weak. I couldn't think in full sentences. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong and I needed it to stop. But I couldn't even figure out what it was. The darkness made it worse. If I had been able to see, even just a little, it might have grounded me. But the projector was off, the lights were off, and the storm outside blocked any natural light. The room felt endless and closed in at the same time. The white noise kept blasting. It felt unreal, like I had crossed into some kind of sensory nightmare. My ears hurt. My chest hurt. My thoughts were scattered fragments. Am I hurt? Did something explode? Did lightning hit the house? Is this happening to me? I remember yelling, but I don't even know if sound came out. The noise swallowed everything. Finally, survival instinct kicked in. I fumbled forward, arms out, blindly trying to find something familiar. I bumped into furniture, nearly tripped over cables, my heart still pounding out of control. I followed the sound, which felt insane, but I knew the receiver had to be somewhere near the screen. I slammed into the entertainment unit and started frantically pressing buttons, random buttons, power, volume, anything my hands touched. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I was just desperate to make it stop. Then, suddenly, silence. The noise cut out instantly. The contrast was almost worse. My ears rang in the sudden quiet, that high-pitched ringing that lingers after something painfully loud. I stood there, bent over, breathing hard, sweat cold on my skin, trying to understand what had just happened. The power was back on. The receiver screen glowed faintly. Everything was normal again. And too normal. The room looked exactly the same as it had before. Same walls, same screen, same speakers. Nothing broken, nothing burned, nothing damaged. The storm outside continued like nothing unusual had happened. That's when it hit me. Nothing had actually gone wrong. The receiver had simply reset. The white noise had been the default output. The volume had defaulted to max. That was it. Just a chain of normal things lining up at exactly the wrong moment. Once I realized that, the fear slowly started to drain away, replaced by this shaky disbelief. My legs still felt weak. My hands still trembled. My heart took a long time to slow down. Even knowing the explanation, my body didn't immediately accept that I was safe. I sat down and just breathed for a while. I didn't turn the game back on. I didn't even turn the lights on right away. I just sat there in the dim glow of the receiver display, listening to the rain outside and letting my nervous system calm down. It was crazy how fast the brain can jump to the worst possible conclusion when it's overwhelmed. 1 second I was relaxed and focused, and the next I was convinced something catastrophic had happened to me. Looking back, it almost sounds funny. A sound system resetting, white noise, bad timing. But in that moment, it was pure terror. The kind that doesn't ask questions. The kind that takes over completely before logic can catch up. Even now I still think about it whenever the power flickers during a storm, whenever a system boots up unexpectedly, whenever a room goes dark too fast. That memory comes back instantly, along with the feeling of my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. It wasn't supernatural, it wasn't dangerous. It was just a perfect storm of timing, technology, and a brain that wasn't prepared for sensory overload. And for a few seconds in a pitch-black room, it felt like the world had ended. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. I was around 14 years old when this happened. It was one of those quiet days that didn't feel important at the time. The kind of day that blends into all the others when you're a teenager. My grandparents had left me home alone so they could go visit my great-grandma at the hospital. She wasn't doing well, and they didn't know how long they'd be gone, But I didn't think much of it. I had stayed home alone plenty of times before, and nothing bad had ever happened. The house felt calm and familiar. I was sitting in the front room with my tablet, leaning back into the couch like I owned the place. The TV was on, playing some old cowboy movie channel, mostly just for background noise. I wasn't really watching it. I liked having the sound on because silence always made the house feel too big and empty. In front of me was a large bowl of egg noodles, still warm. Everything felt normal, safe, almost cozy. Life felt simple in that moment. I remember thinking how nice it was to be left alone, no one bothering me, no one telling me to do chores or turn something down. Just me, my food, my tablet, and the sound of horses and gunfights playing softly in the background. I had no idea how quickly that feeling would disappear. Then the doorbell rang. Right after that, someone knocked on the front door. At first, I wasn't scared. My immediate thought was that my grandparents had come back and needed me to open the garage door for them. That had happened before. I even started to stand up without thinking too much about it. But then something clicked in my head and my body froze halfway up from the couch. They would have called me. They always called or texted if they were coming home early or needed something. I reached for my phone and checked it, even though I already knew what I'd see. There were no missed calls, no texts, nothing. My phone had been completely silent for the past 4 hours. That's when my stomach started to twist. I slowly walked toward the front door, my heart beating faster with every step. The house suddenly felt too quiet, even with the TV still playing. I reached the door and leaned in to look through the peephole, telling myself I was probably overthinking things. When I saw who it was, my blood ran cold. It was my grandpa's brother. I'll call him Marvin. Marvin was not someone I felt safe around. Even at 14, I knew enough to understand that something was wrong with him. 2 years before this, he had gone through a messy divorce. After that, his drinking got worse. He bounced from one family member's house to another, staying wherever someone would let him for a while. Eventually, people stopped offering. A few months before this incident, Marvin had stayed with us. That didn't last long. My grandpa kicked him out after discovering that Marvin had been using the bathroom floor instead of the toilet, even though the toilet was right next to his room. That alone was disturbing enough, but it wasn't the only problem. He was unpredictable, often drunk, and made everyone uncomfortable. After Marvin was kicked out, things got worse. He tried to break into the house at one point. Grandpa knew him well enough to know that Marvin was too scared to actually break a window, even when he was drunk. Still, Grandpa took precautions. He wedged pieces of wood into the window frames so they couldn't be forced open. The house became more secure, but the sense of unease never fully went away. And now there he was, standing on the other side of the front door. My hands started shaking. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared through the peephole, watching him shift his weight from foot to foot. He looked rougher than I remembered. His clothes were worn, his posture sloppy. I couldn't tell if he was drunk, but I didn't need to. The fear hit me all at once, heavy and overwhelming. Then he started calling out for someone to answer the door. Hearing his voice made everything worse. It echoed through the house, loud and invasive, like he already believed he belonged there. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Every bad thought rushed into my head at the same time. What if he breaks in? What if he hurts me? What if no one gets here in time? I started crying without even realizing it. My vision blurred and my breathing turned shallow and fast. I reached over and turned the TV off, terrified that the noise would make him angrier or make him think someone was definitely home. The silence after the TV shut off felt suffocating. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and quietly moved toward the back of the house. I didn't want to make any noise. Every step felt too loud, even though I was barely lifting my feet. When I reached the back door, I opened it just enough to slip outside and softly called for my dogs. They were in the backyard, and thankfully they came right away. Having them near me helped, even just a little. I let them inside and guided them straight into the bathroom. Once we were in, I shut the door and locked it. I sat on the floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and hugged my dogs close. They licked my face and hands, sensing that something was wrong, trying to comfort me in the only way they knew how. Meanwhile, the banging on the front door got louder. Marvin wasn't just knocking anymore. He was pounding on it over and over again. Each hit made me flinch. The sound traveled through the house, bouncing off the walls, making everything feel smaller and more dangerous. I felt trapped, like an animal hiding in a corner. I called my grandma, barely able to speak through my sobs. When she answered, I completely broke down. I told her Marvin was at the door. I told her he was banging on it. I told her I was scared. And my words came out rushed and shaky, but she understood immediately. She told me to stay where I was. She said she was going to call our neighbor Paul and that she and Grandpa would be home as soon as they could. She said maybe 30 minutes. At the time, that felt like an eternity. I stayed locked in that bathroom, crying and shaking, while Marvin continued banging on the front door. Every second felt stretched out. My dogs stayed pressed against me the entire time, their warmth grounding me just enough to keep me from completely panicking. I kept listening for the sound of breaking glass. I kept imagining the door giving way. I kept thinking about how small I was, how alone I was, how helpless I felt in that moment. Eventually the banging stopped. The silence afterward was almost worse. I didn't know if he had left or if he was trying to trick me. I didn't move. I didn't unlock the door. I just sat there holding my dogs, waiting. Then my phone rang. It was my grandma. She told me that Paul had come over and chased Marvin away. I don't know exactly what Paul said or did, and honestly, I don't want to know. I was just relieved that Marvin was gone. My grandparents came home about 10 minutes later. As soon as I heard the garage door open, I finally unlocked the bathroom and ran to them. I felt embarrassed for how hard I was crying, but I couldn't stop. The fear had been building for so long that it all poured out at once. After that day, the house never felt the same. For a long time, every knock at the door made my heart jump. I hated being home alone. I double-checked locks constantly. I replayed that day in my head over and over, wondering what could have happened if things had gone differently. I'm 18 now. I haven't heard a single word about Marvin since that day. I don't know where he is. I don't know if he's alive or dead. Part of me doesn't want to know. All I know is that one afternoon he turned an ordinary, peaceful day into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. And even now, years later, I still remember exactly how that fear felt. It was one of those quiet, ordinary evenings that don't stand out at all until something suddenly goes wrong. The kind of night where nothing feels tense, nothing feels strange, and you're completely relaxed without even realizing it. I was in the basement with my dog, just hanging out. No big plans, no noise, no distractions. The basement had that familiar, slightly cool feeling, the kind of place where time slows down and you forget about the rest of the house above you. My dog was lying nearby, calm and content, completely relaxed. That alone usually makes me feel safe. When a dog is calm, it's easy to believe that everything around you is fine. Dogs notice things before people do, so when they're settled, you let your guard down without thinking about it. The basement lights were on, but the rest of the house was darker. Outside, it was fully night, not dusk, not twilight, but real darkness, the kind where the yard disappears into blackness and you can't tell where the tree line ends and the open space begins. Living in a rural area, that kind of darkness is normal. There are no street lights nearby, no steady glow from neighboring houses. When it's night, It's night. I wasn't doing anything important, just existing in that quiet way where your mind drifts. My dog shifted a little, stretching out on the floor, breathing slow and steady. Everything felt normal. And then I saw it. At first, my brain didn't even react. It was just a flicker of light, something out of place near the tiny basement window. That small window sits low to the ground, just above the foundation, barely big enough to see much of anything clearly. Normally, you don't notice it at all. It's just there. But this time, there was movement. A narrow beam of light swept across the yard outside the window. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't headlights from a passing car. It moved with intention, slow and controlled, like someone was holding a flashlight and scanning the ground. The moment my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing, fear hit me hard. Not the slow kind of fear. The instant gut-dropping kind that makes your stomach turn cold and your heart jump into your throat. The kind that makes your body tense before you've even had time to think. Because I knew exactly what that looked like. A flashlight beam doesn't belong in your yard at night unless someone is there. And what made it worse was that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Only a few weeks earlier, my sister and I had been awake very late. It was one of those nights where you lose track of time, the house quiet and still, everyone else asleep. At some point, we turned on the kitchen light, not thinking about anything except grabbing something to eat or drink. The moment that light flipped on, we saw someone outside, a person sprinting across the yard. They had been close enough to the house to be visible the instant the light came on, and the second they realized someone was awake inside, they ran. Fast. No hesitation, no confusion, just immediate flight, like they had been caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. That image had stuck with me. The suddenness of it, the way the person disappeared into the darkness without a sound. The realization that someone had been out there, close to the house, or watching or waiting, and we hadn't known until it was almost too late. That memory came crashing back the second I saw the flashlight beam outside the basement window. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My mouth went dry instantly. My hands felt clammy, and my legs tensed like I was about to run even though I didn't know where I would go. For a split second, I just stood there, frozen. My dog hadn't reacted yet. That somehow made it worse. I was hyper-aware of the silence, of the way everything felt too still. I stared at the window, my eyes tracking the movement of the light as it shifted slightly, then paused, then moved again. Whoever it was wasn't just passing by. They were searching. I honestly thought I was going to piss myself from fear. That's not an exaggeration. My body felt completely out of control, like it had skipped straight past rational thought and gone straight into survival mode. Every worst-case scenario rushed into my head at once. Someone casing the house, someone trying to break in, someone watching, waiting to see if anyone was home. In a rural area, that kind of situation feels especially dangerous. There's no immediate help, no neighbors right next door, no street traffic. If something goes wrong, you're on your own for a while. I knew I couldn't just stay in the basement. Staying hidden felt wrong. If someone was out there and thought the house was empty, staying quiet could make things worse. I needed them to know someone was awake. I forced myself to move. My legs felt heavy as I went upstairs, every step sounding louder than it should have. I half expected to hear the sound of someone moving outside, the footsteps on gravel, the scrape of shoes on dirt. But there was nothing, just the pounding of my own heart. As soon as I reached the main floor, I turned on a light. Bright, obvious, no subtlety. I wanted whoever was outside to know that someone was home and aware. The light flooded the room, and for a moment, that alone made me feel a little less helpless. Light has a way of grounding you, of pulling you back into reality. Then I let the dog out. The second the door opened, she exploded into action. She ran outside barking like crazy, loud and aggressive, the kind of barking that carries across open land. She wasn't just alert barking, she was fully worked up, whining and barking at the same time, pacing and scanning the yard. That reaction sent another jolt of fear through me. Dogs don't fake that kind of response. I stood just inside the doorway, heart racing, then slowly leaned forward and stuck my head out enough to see the yard. I didn't step all the way outside. I stayed where I could pull back quickly if I needed to. The darkness pressed in around the edge of the porch light. Beyond that glow, the yard was mostly shadows, and then I saw them. Figures near the edge of the property, partially lit by the porch light, partially swallowed by the dark. Smaller than I had expected. Not moving with urgency or stealth. No rushing, no hiding. They turned toward me. That's when everything shifted. They weren't strangers in the way I had imagined. They weren't grown adults. They weren't trying to sneak away. They were kids, neighbor kids who had just moved in not long before. They looked startled, confused, and honestly a little embarrassed. Or one of them raised a hand slightly, like they weren't sure what to do now that they'd been caught. They explained, talking over each other a little, that they were looking for their cat. It had gotten out, and they had been searching around nearby yards with a flashlight, calling its name quietly, hoping to find it before it wandered too far. The flashlight beam, the searching movement, the presence in the yard. It all made sense immediately. The fear didn't disappear instantly, but it loosened its grip. My body was still buzzing with adrenaline, but the sharp edge of terror softened into something else. Relief, mostly. Relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. I was pissed. I won't pretend I wasn't. My hands were still shaking, and my heart was still pounding, and part of me wanted to yell at them for scaring the hell out of me. But more than anything, I was just glad they weren't there for a dangerous reason. I told them, very clearly, that standing in someone's yard at night in a rural area is a bad idea. Not in an angry way, but firm and serious. I explained that out here, people don't expect visitors after dark, and some folks don't ask questions first. They see movement, they see lights, and they assume the worst. That can get someone hurt or killed. They listened. You could tell they hadn't thought about it that way before. To them, it was just a missing cat and a flashlight. To someone inside the house, it looked like something much more threatening. They apologized and moved on to the next area, calling softly for their cat, staying closer to the road this time. I stayed at the door for a while after that, watching the yard, and listening to my dog as she slowly calmed down. Eventually, she stopped barking and came back inside, tail wagging, acting like nothing unusual had happened. But I didn't feel normal right away. Even after the situation was resolved, my body stayed tense. That's the thing about fear. It doesn't leave the moment the danger turns out to be harmless. It lingers. It sits in your chest and your stomach and makes you second-guess every shadow and sound. I locked the door and checked the windows, even though I knew there was no longer a threat. I went back downstairs eventually, but the basement felt different. That sense of easy comfort was gone. All I could think about was how quickly things had escalated in my mind, how a single beam of light had turned into full-blown panic, and how recent experiences shape the way you react to new situations. If that earlier incident with my sister hadn't happened, maybe I wouldn't have been so afraid. Maybe I would have assumed it was nothing right away. But once you've seen someone run from your yard in the middle of the night, your brain doesn't forget that feeling. It files it away. And the next time something even slightly similar happens, it pulls that memory out and says, this could be dangerous. Looking back, it really was just a coincidence. Wrong timing, wrong place. A normal situation colliding with a loaded memory. Nothing supernatural, nothing malicious. just people crossing paths without realizing how it would look from the other side. But in that moment, standing in the basement, watching a flashlight sweep past the window, it was terrifying. It reminded me how vulnerable you can feel inside your own home, how quickly safety can feel fragile, and how powerful the mind is when it fills in the blanks with fear. Even now, whenever I see unexpected light outside at night, my heart still jumps a little. Just for a second, enough to remind me of that night, the fear and the relief that followed. Sometimes the scariest moments aren't caused by anything bad actually happening. They're caused by what almost might have. This didn't feel supernatural to me. Even now, I don't think it was anything paranormal or otherworldly. It was just one of those moments where timing lines up in the worst possible way and your brain does the rest. But at the time, sitting alone in my house, logic didn't matter much. It was last October, one of those months where the days are shorter but not cold yet, and the nights feel heavier than usual. I had stopped by Goodwill, not looking for anything specific. I go there sometimes just to browse, to see what kind of random things people donate. Old clothes, mismatched dishes, forgotten books, stuff that used to matter to someone and now just sits on shelves waiting for a second life. That's when I saw it. A Ouija board. It wasn't hidden or dramatic. It was just there, sitting among board games and puzzles like it was completely normal. The box was a little worn, corners bent but otherwise intact. I stood there for a moment longer than I probably should have. I wasn't scared of it. I didn't feel any weird energy or anything like that. I mostly thought it was odd that someone would donate one. It felt like one of those things people either throw away secretly or keep forever. I don't even believe in that stuff. I never really have. To me, it was just a piece of cardboard and plastic, something people attach stories to. I picked it up more out of curiosity than anything else. I remember thinking it was kind of funny, like owning a Ouija board was something people joked about but didn't actually do anymore. So I bought it. I brought it home, put it down in a corner, and didn't touch it for a few days. Life went on like normal. Work, errands, scrolling on my phone, the usual routine. The board just sat there, leaning against the wall, not doing anything, not causing any trouble. Honestly, I forgot about it most of the time. A few days later, I had a day to myself. No plans, no one coming over, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels nice at first, but slowly starts to stretch out. The house felt still, like it was waiting for something. I was bored more than anything. That's when I remembered the board. I told myself I was being ridiculous, even thinking twice about it. I didn't believe in spirits. I didn't believe in messages from beyond. But curiosity has a way of creeping in when you're alone, and there's nothing else demanding your attention. I figured I'd mess around with it for a minute, laugh at myself, and put it away. I sat down on the floor and opened the box. The board looked exactly like you'd expect. Letters, numbers, yes, no, goodbye. The planchette was light, cheap plastic. Nothing about it felt special or powerful. It felt like a toy. I placed it in front of me and rested my fingers lightly on the planchette, feeling a little silly for even going through the motions. The house was quiet. No TV, no music, just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't light candles. I didn't say anything spooky. I just looked down at the board and, half joking, half curious, said out loud, "Is there someone here?" That's it. The moment the words left my mouth, the power went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, completely out. The lights shut off instantly. The hum of the fridge stopped. The room dropped into silence so sudden it felt like pressure in my ears. 1 second everything was normal, and the next, the house was dark and dead quiet. I froze. My heart jumped straight into my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the board, my hands still resting on the planchette, my brain trying to catch up to what had just happened. Every logical explanation I'd ever believed in disappeared in that moment. I knew, logically, that power outages happen. I knew storms knock out lines. I knew there was a rational reason, but logic takes time to come back, and fear is instant. My body reacted before my brain could step in. I felt a rush of heat, then cold. My skin prickled like something had just brushed past me. The silence felt loud, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I became painfully aware of how alone I was in that house. I'm not proud to admit it, but I panicked. Not a slow, creeping fear. Full, immediate panic. My hands started shaking. My breathing sped up. I stood up so fast I almost knocked the board over. And yes, I actually pissed my pants a little from fear. That's how hard my body reacted. It was embarrassing, but at that moment, embarrassment didn't matter. Survival instincts had taken over completely. I backed away from the board like it had done something wrong, like it was responsible, even though I knew that made no sense. I didn't say anything else. I didn't touch it again. I just wanted light back, noise, normalcy. I stood there in the dark, heart racing, listening. No footsteps, no sounds, just silence. Eventually I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The familiar glow helped a little. It reminded me that this was still my house, still the same walls, same floor, same air. Nothing had changed except the power. I waited. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The power didn't come back right away. That somehow made it worse. If it had come back immediately, I could have laughed it off. But the longer the house stayed dark, the more my imagination tried to fill in the gaps. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. I kept repeating it in my head like a mantra. It's just bad timing. It's just bad timing. Eventually the power stayed out long enough that I realized this wasn't just a quick outage. I put the board back in the box without really looking at it and shoved it into a closet. I didn't feel like messing around anymore. Whatever curiosity I had earlier was completely gone. About a week later, I found out what actually caused the outage. Strong winds had knocked down a power line in the area. That was it. No mystery, no spirits, no hidden meaning. Just weather and bad timing lining up in the most unfortunate way possible. Once I knew that, I felt stupid for how scared I'd been. But even knowing the explanation didn't erase the memory of that moment. The way my heart had dropped, the way the silence had felt unnatural, the way fear had taken over before reason had a chance to step in. That's the thing about coincidences. On paper, they're harmless, easy to explain. But when you're inside them, when they hit at just the wrong second, they feel massive, overwhelming, personal. I don't think the Ouija board did anything. I don't think I contacted anything. I don't think there was anyone there. I think I just happened to speak at the exact moment something outside my control happened. But timing matters, and sometimes timing alone is enough to scare the hell out of you. This happened about 4 months after I got my dog. She was a German Shepherd puppy, still young enough to be a little clumsy, but already big enough to feel solid and reassuring. By that point, she had settled into the house and into my life in a way that felt natural, like she'd always been there. She followed me everywhere, slept near me, and paid close attention to everything I did. I trusted her instincts more than I realized at the time. That night, it was just the two of us at home. My parents were out, and the house was quiet in the way it gets late at night when nothing is moving and every sound feels louder than it should. We were in my bedroom, relaxing. I was lying on the bed, half scrolling on my phone, half zoning out, and she was curled up nearby, calm and comfortable. The room felt safe, familiar, normal. And then something happened that broke that feeling instantly. I heard my own voice, not in my head, not as a memory. I heard it out loud. It was a very specific call I use for my dog. Not a name, not a generic, "come here," but a sound and tone I'd developed just for her. It wasn't something other people used, and it wasn't something you'd accidentally recreate. It was instinctive, personal, and unmistakably mine. The sound came from outside. The moment it happened, my dog reacted before I did. Her ears shot straight up, stiff and alert. Her body tensed. Then she started growling softly, low in her throat. That alone sent a chill through me. She was usually calm, friendly, and curious about people. Even strangers got a tail wag, or at least cautious interest. I had never heard her growl like that before, not once. My heart started beating faster as I sat up and listened. I hadn't moved, I hadn't spoken, I knew I hadn't made the sound, and yet there it was, hanging in the air like someone had just stood outside my window and called to her. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't not look. I slowly got off the bed and moved toward the window, my dog following close behind me, her body rigid and focused. She wasn't barking yet, just watching, listening, ready. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer out into the backyard. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it registered. There were eyes, just eyes. They were staring straight at me from the darkness, positioned at about head height. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see a body. No outline, no movement, no reflection of anything else. Just two eyes, fixed and unmoving, looking directly at me through the window. The shock hit me so fast I didn't even think. I just yelled, "Fuck!" loud enough to echo through the house. That was all my dog needed. She exploded into barking, loud and aggressive, throwing herself toward the window like she was ready to go straight through it if she had to. Her reaction was nothing like her normal excited barking. This was warning. This was defense. This was her telling whatever was out there that it was not welcome. Adrenaline flooded my body. My hands were shaking, my chest felt tight, and my thoughts were racing in every direction at once. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, and did the first thing that made sense in my panicked brain. I went to get my dad's gun. Even as I grabbed it, part of me knew how ridiculous that was. I had no training. I didn't even know what I would do if something actually happened. But holding it made me feel slightly less helpless, like I wasn't completely exposed, like I had some small amount of control in a situation that suddenly felt very wrong. I went back to the bedroom, my dog still barking and positioning herself between me and the window. Her eyes never left that direction. Her entire focus was locked on the yard. I reached for the switch that controlled the floodlights outside. The moment I turned them on, the backyard was flooded with bright, harsh light. Every corner, every shadow, every patch of grass became visible all at once. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement, no eyes. Just an empty yard. The sudden absence of anything made my stomach drop even further. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Had the light changed the angle? Had whatever it was moved that fast? My dog didn't relax. Even with the yard fully lit, she stayed tense. Her barking slowed, but didn't stop completely. She kept staring at one specific corner of the yard, her head slightly tilted, her body rigid, like she could still sense something there. And then I felt it too. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic or exaggerated, but it was a feeling, deep in my gut. A sense that something was still there, even though I couldn't see it. Like being watched without having proof. Like the air itself felt heavier in that spot. I stood there for a long time, gun in hand, lights blazing, heart still racing. Eventually, nothing else happened. No more sounds, no more movement, just silence. But the feeling didn't go away easily. Well, over the next few days I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe someone had walked through the yard and left before I turned the lights on. I told myself everything I could think of that sounded reasonable. What made it harder to dismiss was my dog. After that night, she was different about that corner of the yard. Completely different. Before the incident, I hadn't trained her to go in any specific spot. As long as she went on the grass, I didn't care. She used the whole yard without hesitation. After that night, that one corner became off limits to her. She would avoid it entirely. She wouldn't step into it. She wouldn't sniff around it. If her path took her too close, she'd veer away without any encouragement from me. When she was outside, or she kept an eye on that area the way she had that night, cautious and alert. Even when she really needed to go, she refused to use that spot. Dogs don't reason things out the way humans do. They don't convince themselves something is fine just because it should be. They react to what they sense, and once that association is made, it sticks. Seeing her avoid that area over and over again made it impossible for me to fully shake what happened. I never heard my voice outside again. I never saw the eyes again. But the memory stayed vivid, sharp and unsettling. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself glancing toward that corner, half expecting to see something looking back. Other times I'd notice my dog pause and stare, just for a second longer than normal, before moving on. Nothing else ever happened. No proof, no explanation. Just one moment that shattered the calm and left behind a lingering unease that never fully went away. I don't know what it was. I don't pretend to. I just know that both my dog and I heard my voice when I didn't speak, and both of us reacted to something outside that neither of us could explain. And even now, long after the fear has faded into something quieter and more distant, that corner of the yard remains untouched, as if both of us agreed, without ever saying it out loud, that whatever was there once was enough. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.